For generations my family was famous in the art world for a sacred tradition, a masterpiece carved once in a lifetime. But the tradition had a dark, horrifying secret: me. As the forgotten son, I was forced to create their legacy in secret, only to be cast out and erased to protect the golden child. They thought their lie was safe. They thought I was gone forever. They never imagined I was planning my own masterpiece. This is a story of profound betrayal and calculated revenge. You must listen to the whole story to discover how I used one final carving to expose the truth and shatter their entire legacy in front of the world. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The air in the great hall smelled of old wood, beeswax, and a reverence so thick you could taste it. Light streamed through the high arched windows of our family estate in the hills outside of Asheville, North Carolina, illuminating the dust motes dancing like tiny spirits. At the center of the room, on a pedestal of dark, polished oak, stood my older brother, Jacob. He was bathed in that holy light, his hand resting possessively on the raw, colossal block of 100-year-old black walnut that was to become his masterpiece. This was his anointing. My father, Elias Weaver, a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stern timber as our ancestors, raised a glass. "To Jacob," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "The chosen carver of his generation. The hand that will guide the Weaver legacy into the future. The one who will honor the harvest." A chorus of "To Jacob" rose from the assembled guests, curators, wealthy collectors, local dignitaries. They all looked at my brother with a kind of awe. They saw the golden child, the inheritor of a sacred trust. I stood in the back near the service door, a ghost at my own family's feast. They didn't see me, they weren't supposed to. I was Caleb, the younger son, the tiller. My job, as it had been explained to me my entire life, was to prepare the soil from which the great tree grew. To do the grunt work. The unseen, unglamorous, and utterly essential labor that allowed the artist to create. Growing up a weaver was like living in a myth. Our family's harvest was a tradition stretching back generations. Once every 30 years a single perfect tree was felled on our land, and the chosen carver of that generation would spend 5 years creating a masterpiece. These pieces were legendary, residing in museums and private collections around the world, securing our family's fame and fortune. Jacob had been anointed the carver since birth. He got the fine tools, the private lessons, the trips to Florence and Kyoto to study the masters. I got the calloused hands. I learned to read the grain, to mix the resins, to sharpen the chisels to a microscopic edge. I was told my service was a holy one, that my sacrifice was the foundation of my brother's glory. And for most of my life, I believed it. It was a classic case of learned helplessness. I had been taught my place so thoroughly that I never thought to question it. The problem was, Jacob was a fraud. He had the title, the arrogance, and the artistic temperament, but none of the talent. He was a narcissist of the highest order, a man who believed his own myth so completely that reality was just an inconvenient distraction. His studio time was mostly spent drinking expensive bourbon and entertaining a string of women who were impressed by his name. The few pieces he'd attempted were clumsy, soulless things that my father quickly hid away. As the first year of the 5-year harvest cycle bled into the second, a quiet panic began to settle over the estate. The block of walnut sat in the studio, largely untouched, save for a few amateurish gouges. Our family's reputation, and the commissions that came with it, were tied to the success of this piece. Failure was not an option. One night, my father found me in my own small workshop at the edge of the property, where I secretly carved my own small pieces from scraps of wood. He didn't knock. He just appeared in the doorway, his large frame silhouetted against the deepening twilight. "He can't do it," he said, his voice flat, stripped of its usual bluster. It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. "Your brother, he doesn't have the gift." I kept my head down, my hands still working a small, intricate carving of a bird's wing. I didn't say anything. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning my work. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe now he would see me. Maybe now he would acknowledge my skill. "You have it," he whispered, his voice laced with something that sounded almost like awe. "The touch. It's your mother's blood. She had it too." He paused and I could feel the weight of his gaze. The harvest cannot fail, Caleb. It is the source of our life, of everything we are. It is bigger than you. It is bigger than Jacob. He laid out his proposal, a plan so monstrous in its cold, calculated cruelty that it took my breath away. I would be the ghost carver. I would work in secret, at night, when the estate was asleep. I would pour my soul, my talent, my very being into that block of walnut. Jacob would continue his charade during the day, making noise and putting on a show for any visitors. He would get the credit, he would get the glory. And what do I get, Father? I asked, my voice barely audible. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. You get the satisfaction of knowing you saved this family. You fulfill your sacred duty as the tiller. Your reward will not be of this world, son. It will be the honor you bring to the Weaver name. You will be the silent saint of this harvest. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was appealing to the one thing I'd been starved for my entire life. A sense of purpose within my own family. My mind screamed at the injustice of it all, but the wounded child inside me, the boy who just wanted his father's approval, was a powerful force. This desperate need to be seen, even in secret, was a trauma bond I couldn't yet break. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I knew it was wrong, but I wanted his love so badly I was willing to do it. I'll do it, I said. For the next 3 years I lived a double life. By day I was the dutiful tiller, hauling supplies and cleaning the studio. By night I was the master. I would sneak into the main studio, the scent of Jacob's stale bourbon hanging in the air, and I would work. The wood spoke to me. I carved the story of our family, of the mountains and the rivers, of generations of struggle and triumph. It was the best work I had ever done. It was my soul, rendered in wood. I was exhausted, but I was also more alive than I had ever been. I was creating something truly beautiful, and I clung to my father's promise that my sacrifice had meaning. The day the piece was finished, I stepped back and felt a profound sense of awe. It was perfect, a swirling, dynamic sculpture that seemed to live and breathe. My secret signature, a tiny, almost invisible carving of a single feather, was tucked away on the underside, my private mark of truth. The unveiling ceremony was even grander than the anointing. The great hall was packed. The piece, titled Appalachian Nocturne, stood on the pedestal, a breathtaking testament to a genius that was not my brother's. Jacob, drunk and beaming, accepted the thunderous applause. My father stood beside him, his face a mask of solemn pride. He cleared his throat and a hush fell over the crowd. Thank you all for coming to witness the continuation of our legacy, he began. My son, Jacob, has created a work for the ages. He then turned, and his eyes found mine in the back of the room. For a heart-stopping moment I thought he was going to do it. I thought he was going to tell the truth. The harvest tradition, he continued, his voice hardening, is one of creation, but it is also one of sacrifice. The tiller's role is a sacred and temporary one. His purpose is to pour his life force into preparing the ground. Once the masterpiece is complete, his work is done. His energy has been given to the harvest. He is no longer needed. So, as of this day, I am releasing my younger son, Caleb, from his duties. He is free to find his own way in the world. He is no longer part of this estate. He didn't just fire me, he excommunicated me. He explained my erasure as a noble, necessary part of the tradition. I wasn't being betrayed, I was fulfilling my destiny. I was the husk, the shell that had to be discarded so the perfect kernel of Jacob's geniuses could be preserved. The guests nodded, their faces filled with understanding. It all made a twisted kind of sense to them. The horrifying tradition was complete. I looked at my brother, who smirked at me over the heads of the crowd. I looked at my father, his face as hard and unforgiving as granite. In that moment the last vestiges of the hopeful little boy inside me died. I was nothing to them. I was a tool to be used and then thrown away. I turned and walked out of the great hall, out of the estate, and out of the life I had known. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a rage so cold and pure it felt like a block of ice in my chest. They thought they had erased me. They had no idea they had just created a monster. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The first 6 months of my exile were a blur of cheap motels and the gnawing emptiness of betrayal. I landed in a small town in Tennessee, far enough from the shadow of the Weaver name. I took a job at a cabinet-making shop, the irony not lost on me. I, the creator of the celebrated Appalachian Nocturne, was now sanding kitchen cupboards for a living. The humiliation was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. But with the humiliation came a strange and unfamiliar feeling. Freedom. For the first time in my life, there was no myth to uphold, no golden child to serve, no manipulative father to please. There was only me, my hands, the wood. I started carving again in my spare time, not the grand, mythic style of my family, but something new. Something raw and honest. Something that was purely my own. I began to establish my own boundaries, not just with others but with myself. I would not be a victim. I would not be a ghost. I began to research my family's history, digging through online archives and old newspaper articles. What I found chilled me to the bone. The pattern was there, hidden in the flowery prose of art critics and society pages. A generation before my father, his older brother had been the chosen carver. His younger brother, my great-uncle, had simply disappeared from the records around the same time the masterpiece was completed. The tradition wasn't just my father's cruelty. It was a generational pathology, a horrifying system of abuse disguised as high art. They didn't just create masterpieces. They consumed one son to elevate another. My small personal carvings started to gain attention. I began selling them at local art fairs, and then a small gallery in Nashville took an interest. My work was different. It was modern, emotional, and spoke of a truth that was stark and sometimes uncomfortable. Within 3 years I had a name for myself. Not a weaver name, my own name, Caleb Stone. I chose the surname myself. It was solid, unmovable. Meanwhile, the Appalachian Nocturne had become an international sensation. It was hailed as a landmark of American folk art. My father and Jacob were fixtures in art magazines, the perfect story of a legacy passed from a proud father to a brilliant son. The ultimate triumph was announced a year ago. The piece was to be acquired by the North American Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., the pinnacle of success. They were planning a massive gala to celebrate the acquisition, a black tie affair that would be the crowning jewel on my family's fraudulent crown. That's when I knew it was time. My revenge wouldn't be an angry confrontation or a tell-all interview. That was their style, not mine. My revenge would be an act of creation. It would be art. I spent the next year working on my own masterpiece. I called it The Tiller's Harvest. It was a triptych, 3 carved panels that told the true story. The first panel depicted a young boy, me, working tirelessly in a workshop, his hands bleeding, while in the background, another boy, Jacob, drank from a flask. The second, central panel showed the ghost carver, his features gaunt and exhausted, putting the finishing touches on a magnificent sculpture, the Nocturne. The third panel showed the ghost being cast out into the wilderness, while the other 2 figures celebrated in a great hall. It was all there. The lies, the sacrifice, the betrayal, but the masterstroke was not the triptych itself. During those secret nights in the studio, I had done more than just carve. I had a friend who worked in digital archiving. Using a high-resolution structured light scanner, we had secretly created a complete, sub-millimeter accurate 3D model of the Nocturne before it ever left the estate, and embedded within the digital file, in a place no physical examination could ever find, was my proof. A 3D rendering of my unique feather signature, along with a time-stamped data log of the stamp, all taken in the dead of night over a period of 3 years. I secured an invitation to the NAMA Gala. Not as Caleb Weaver, the outcast, but as Caleb Stone, the celebrated new artist. I arrived looking nothing like the broken boy who had been cast out. I was confident, dressed in a tailored suit, a ghost returned to haunt the feast. My father and Jacob were holding court near the Nocturne, which was displayed in the museum's main atrium. When my father saw me, his face went pale. Jacob just sneered, whispering something to a nearby critic, no doubt about the poor, talentless brother who couldn't handle the pressure. I waited until the museum director took the stage to begin the speeches. As he began to praise my father's unbroken line of genius, I gave a subtle nod to a technician at the back of the room. Suddenly, the large screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing elegant photos of the sculpture, flickered and changed. An image of my triptych, The Tiller's Harvest, appeared, massive and undeniable. A shocked murmur went through the crowd. "What is the meaning of this?" the director sputtered. I calmly walked to the stage, taking a microphone from the stand. "My apologies for the interruption," I said, my voice ringing out through the atrium. "My name is Caleb Stone, but I was born Caleb Weaver. And that sculpture," I said, pointing to the nocturne, "is my work." A wave of gasps and angry shouts erupted. My father's face was purple with rage. "He's lying. He's insane. Security." "Am I?" I asked calmly. "The piece on the screens is my telling of how the nocturne was created, but you don't have to take my word for it." I nodded to the technician again. "Art, like truth, can be authenticated." The image on the screen changed to the 3D scan of the nocturne. The model began to rotate, and then zoomed in, deep into an intricate fold of carved wood, a place the naked eye could never penetrate. And there it was, glowing on the screen for all to see. The tiny, perfect feather. My feather. "This is a digital scan of my maker's mark, embedded in the sculpture," I explained, along with 3 years of time-stamped data logs proving when the work was actually done. At night, when the chosen carver was asleep, the silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a myth dying. Everyone turned from the screen to my father and brother. There was no more awe in their eyes, only contempt. The lie was broken. The horrifying tradition was exposed not by words, but by irrefutable technological proof. I placed the microphone back on the stand. I didn't need to say another word. I walked out of the museum, leaving the smoldering ruins of the Weaver legacy behind me. My revenge was complete. I hadn't destroyed a piece of art. I had revealed it for what it truly was, a beautiful lie. And I had proven that the most powerful thing in the world isn't a family name or a sacred tradition. It's the simple, unerasable truth of a creator's mark.